That's an interesting question. I think Americans have certain expectations of price points. So that Chinese food and Mexican food are very popular, but people have difficulty being convinced that they should pay more than a certain amount. Some of these restaurants in Flushing have very expensive specialties, things that involve, ingredients like sea cucumber or, expensive styles of preparation. With the exception of a few things like Peking duck, that does not carry over to the general public. Whereas 40, 50 years ago, Italian food was all cheap. Japanese food was cheap. How they managed to change their image, I think it has to do with both Italian and Japanese popular culture and fashion becoming important, so that Italian culture through things like clothing or design became upscale, similarly with Japanese food. The other thing is that I think the Chinese cuisine and Chinese restaurants are punished for their virtues. That is to say, eating food in a Chinese restaurant in China or here is convivial. It's friendly. It's good for a large group. It involves sharing. The upscale model, however, established by French restaurants is quieter, more intimate, more, what shall I say, snobbish. The biggest challenge is that I think many restaurants are not going to, when the parents retire, the children aren't going to continue the restaurant. This is partly because the children have careers that are seen as more desirable. Not so much that they make more money, but that they have more prestige in society, or they are more independent and not tied to the demanding schedule of a restaurant that's open all the time. And, so a lot of Chinese restaurants are closing because of social mobility or because of parental ambitions for their children to do something other than run a restaurant. A big challenge is, of course, what we were speaking about, the difficulty of scaling the restaurants up in terms of price points and prestige. So that's the thing that there's some control over. And it may be, and it's likely that there will be at least some of these fairly fancy restaurants in big cities that have a more sophisticated clientele. And but the phenomenon that we've seen until recently, where there's no town that is so small, or it has to be very small not to have a Chinese restaurant. I don't think that's going to last. I think they're not going to be as spread out. Just as an example, I gave a talk once in northern Texas at a university in a, kind of prosperous, a place where a lot of cattle are herded, but certainly not kind of empty and deserty part of Texas. And I spoke to some high school students who were one was from a town, about 15 miles away. And they had a McDonald's and a Chinese restaurant. And then there were people from about another county, maybe 30 miles away. And these kids said they didn't have a McDonald's, but they did have a Chinese restaurant.